All right. Good morning. Thank you all for joining today's webinar. My name is Bianca Simmons. I am the Pro Bono Programs Coordinator with the North Carolina Bar Foundation. And this morning we have with us Elizabeth Savage. She will be presenting on providing small business owners and entrepreneurs information on essential disaster planning practices and relief resources to best prepare for and recover from a disaster. And I will go ahead and give it over to Elizabeth now for her to do her introduction and to share a little bit about herself and go ahead and get into today's presentation. Thank you so much.
Thank you. All right. Well, welcome everybody, whether you're joining live or I know these will be recorded for the webinar archive. So if you're viewing in an archived video, welcome as well. So I'm Elizabeth Savage. I've been practicing disaster law in the state of North Carolina for a number of years now. I'm currently an assistant general counsel with the Office of State Budget and Management, practicing disaster recovery and administering recovery programming for North Carolina. So with that being said, today we're going to focus on business essentials of disaster preparedness and recovery. So disasters do have the potential to cause significant business disruptions. This includes employee safety concerns, business closures, revenue loss, and damage to inventory and other property. Does your business have a continuity and disaster recovery plan? Do you know about the disaster assistance options and programs for business entities? From Preparedness to Recovery, this webinar will provide small business owners and entrepreneurs essential information on disaster planning practices and relief resources to best prepare for and recover from a disaster event. All that being said, this webinar is being provided through the NC LEAP program. It's informational only, so this is not legal advice. Please don't construe this as legal advice. If you need an attorney, please contact one for yourself or for your business. And the perspectives and opinions contained in this webinar are personally held by myself and are in no way considered a reflection on my employer. All right, so going through today's agenda, we'll do an overview of disaster, recognizing from a public perspective that not everybody knows the ins and outs and the weeds, so to say, of disaster recovery and preparedness. But we're going to go through just those high level, what are the different types of hazards and disasters to be aware of, some NC specific history and trends that we have seen over the past decade. Disaster declarations, we'll do, again, high level of just the process and the different types to be aware of. And we'll take a look at the disaster recovery continuum because that's going to guide how you go through your planning and recovery process. We'll then get into disaster preparedness. We'll talk about best practices and then talk a little bit more about business continuity plans versus disaster recovery plans, the differences, the importance of each. For disaster recovery itself, we'll talk about different sources of relief, namely insurance, FEMA, SBA, IRS, DUA is disaster unemployment assistance, special industry consideration slide specifically for agriculture. So that will be your USDA resources. Then we'll get into comments and questions and conclusion. I'll also add that we are right in the middle of Atlantic hurricane season. So Atlantic hurricane season runs from June 1st to November 30th. So as of today, we're sort of smack in the middle of it, and we've seen some activity already. It's been a pretty active season. Most notably, most recently, we had Tropical Storm Debbie come through, and that did result in an emergency declaration. We'll see that in another slide moving forward. But this is a timely presentation, and as a business owner or an interest holder in a business, this is now and preferably before June 1st is the best time to be thinking about this topic. But if you haven't done it yet, that's all right. North Carolina hasn't been, well, so far we've been lucky this season. I'll say that. I'll also say that this presentation is a focus on private sector, small businesses, and sole proprietorships. If you are a larger entity or are engaged in nonprofit work, this isn't targeted directly at you, but some of this information can be helpful. All right, so different types of hazards and disasters. I've listed on this slide numerous things that your business could encounter, right? You've got natural and severe weather disasters, public health disasters, man-made disasters, So for North Carolina, at least, we're fairly familiar with some of these natural and severe weather disasters: hurricanes, floods, thunderstorms, tornadoes, winter storms, even earthquakes. There was an earthquake event in 2020. Some of you may have experienced that. Landslides, mudslides, and avalanches, thankfully. But certainly a number of these natural and severe weather events not only have happened, but continue to happen. It is a trend for our state and our areas. Public health, all of us are all too familiar with epidemics and pandemics at this point, notably the COVID-19 pandemic. There are also other infectious, vector-borne, and food and waterborne diseases to be aware of. That could certainly affect your employees and business leadership, and ultimately your operations at that point, depending on how widespread those diseases or infections are in your business. I think most commonly, though, especially on an industry-specific perspective, you're going to be looking at some man-made disasters. So we're thinking about technology-related events, cyber attacks, infrastructure failures, chemical and oil spills, radiation, gas leaks, things of this nature. This, again, is an industry-specific situation. So be thinking about, what is your business regularly engaging in? What types of risks do you typically see? For North Carolina, this is a historic overview of the declared disasters in the past decade, so going back to 2010. And I've marked on this graph a number of the high impact or severe disasters that we've seen. Those notable ones are going to be Hurricane Matthew in 2016, Hurricane Florence in 2018, the COVID-19 pandemic, which was officially declared in 2020, and Tropical Storm Fred for 2021. And of course, most recently, we had Tropical Storm Debbie. And you'll notice as well the differences between emergency declarations and major disaster declarations. That's normally what we see in North Carolina. However, there have been, I think, 3 or so fire management assistant declarations. That's not, I would say, typical for our state, but it has occurred. So the declaration process. A presidential disaster declaration is the result of a sequential legal process that involves action from all levels of government, local, state, and federal. This is the process that local and state governments use to request federal disaster assistance. And I emphasize federal in all caps here because we're really going to focus on federal relief resources today. But that's not to exclude state resources. You know, North Carolina, we have the North Carolina General Assembly that can, at its discretion, choose to be active in providing resources for not only individuals and households, but businesses as well. And so this presentation is really focusing on federal resources that tend to be a mainstay in the recovery continuum. But of course, depending on the disaster and depending on what the General Assembly passes through legislation, there may be funding that comes in the future for certain disasters. And some of that may be targeted towards business relief. When a disaster event occurs, it's apparent from an early monitoring stage that a state or tribal government is going to need federal assistance. It is upon that state or tribal government to submit a request to the president to request disaster assistance. And from there, the response is ultimately determined by the president. A state does not always request federal disaster assistance. Requests for aid depend on the nature and severity of the disaster event. And I've included this graphic here over on the right of the slide. I think it's fantastic just to show the sequence of events and how on a federal and state level, in the initial state and local response strategies ultimately come together at the very beginning for the joint preliminary damage assessment. And then it's a cascading effect from that point on determining what damage exists, assessing the need, requesting that a declaration be made, and then ultimately at the very end, hopefully receiving declaration status and assistance from the federal government through various programs. And we'll move forward into the different types of programs that are most relevant for businesses. So I've highlighted there are really two main disaster declaration types to be aware of. One is an emergency declaration, the other is a major disaster declaration. The differences really, how they are requested was described pretty much in the previous slide. It's pretty much the same. The difference comes down to what is being offered from the federal government. So, in an emergency declaration, the purpose of an emergency declaration is really just providing core emergency services for the protection of lives, property, public health and safety, or to lessen or avert the threat of a catastrophe. So, one could also be made as a pre-disaster emergency declaration when you know something is coming, you've been monitoring the weather, and the state knows that it needs to prepare. So in anticipation of that imminent event, a pre-disaster declaration could be requested. But at the end of the day, an emergency declaration is very limited in the type of assistance that will ultimately be offered. Limited in public assistance, namely to debris removal and emergency protective measures. Some individual assistance could be authorized, but it is certainly not the full, I suppose, gambit of individual and household programming that FEMA has available. It's more limited or narrow scope of offerings. And the hazard mitigation grant program is not available. So the main type of disaster declaration, and what most folks talk about when they say, oh, a disaster has been declared, is the major disaster declaration over here on the right. The president can declare a major disaster declaration, again, upon the request of a state or tribal government, when the president determines that a disaster event has caused such severe damage that it's truly beyond the combined capabilities of state and local governments to respond. And I think that, just to take a note here and pause here, the purpose of federal disaster aid overall is to supplement state and local efforts. It's certainly not to be a replacement. And, if you think about just the capacity of organizations like FEMA and the type of operational structure that they have, it's not just, North Carolina, it's the entire nation, including other tribal governments. And so it's quite large. It's quite, and the nature of how the sequence of delivery goes, it always starts at a local level. And then from there, depending on need and capacity, we move forward in what is going to be offered. In a major disaster declaration, you're going to have the much individual assistance. This includes individuals and households program. This is the typical, if I personally applied for FEMA assistance, the IHP program is what most folks are talking about. That's where things like temporary housing, assistance and funds for repairs, home repairs, reimbursements, that type of assistance is coming through that program. There's also disaster unemployment assistance, disaster legal services, crisis counseling. And again, notably for businesses, the Small Business Administration can at that point authorize disaster loans under this authorization structure. So here we have the disaster recovery continuum. And it's really here just to highlight that disaster recovery is a process that begins prior to the disaster event. Business decisions and priorities that are established during the preparedness and short-term recovery stages do have a large impact on the efficiency and duration of overall business recovery. All right. Moving on into our preparedness section, best practices. So for best practices, I've got the huge stack of paperwork because I imagine, especially for small businesses, and as you start to maybe scale up your ventures and your structures, paperwork starts adding up, right? So it can be overwhelming sometimes, but it's important to try to keep track of it. And we'll get more into what specific types of paperwork and documents you need to be keeping track of for emergency preparedness purposes. But as far as just general best practices go, we want to engage in continuity and disaster recovery planning before a disaster event. So again, in that preparedness stage, before disaster actually happens, you want to have something in place. You don't want to be scrambling around unknown, unsure, not knowing what to do, not sure who to contact, or what the sequence of delivery for your own operational structure is going to be, to how best to recover in the immediate moment and protect your business assets, but then also move forward to get back on your feet again as quickly as possible in the later stages. We want to have that set. We don't want to be questioning these things. We want to just use them when we need them. So go ahead and engage in those planning purposes before disaster occurs. Maintain a current catalog of business assets. Monitor local and state weather and environmental trends. We highlighted earlier some of the historical trends for North Carolina. We're well aware of our areas, but you may have ventures in other states. You may have a more specific locality that, even if it doesn't rise to the level of a declared disaster at the federal level, you might be aware of maybe certain flooding that tends to happen around some of your business locations. Be aware of those, and again, of industry-specific hazards as well. Engage in disaster mitigation to best prepare your facilities and systems for future disaster events. Mitigation, generally speaking, is just a really fancy way of saying you're going to do something now to prepare yourself for the future. So a good example of this could be, again, maybe you know that your office location is prone to flooding. Maybe you don't necessarily own your office location, but you work with your commercial landlord and realize pretty early on that some of your essential fixtures or equipment is going to get damaged by flooding, or is more prone to flooding damage without certain things like gutters and culverts and things that you might need to equip your actual built facility with. So work with your landlord ahead of time, mitigate that early on, so when flooding event happens, you're less likely to have such severe damage without those mitigation actions having happened. Conduct regularly scheduled internal compliance audits and reviews. This is good for a number of reasons, but I will emphasize this for folks and businesses, particularly who are engaged in state and federal procurement. Procurement is a whole other topic, and I'm not going to get into it today. But for those businesses and ventures that are aware of procurement, and you're engaged in, that there are very specific laws and regulations around what you can and cannot do. And also how you record and maintain your records. So make sure you're checking yourself, and it's easier to go ahead and do it maybe on a quarterly basis or biannual basis than to just say you'll get to it tomorrow, because sometimes we never get to it tomorrow, and then tomorrow comes and we're missing something extremely important when maybe a federal audit's being pressed upon you. Make sure business records are up to date, and again, replace and update as needed. I think this is, in this topic area at least, really, I'm going to emphasize insurance documentation, records and policies. Check out your insurance policies, make sure it's covering what you need to cover or updating it. That's going to be a really big deal in trying to get the most out of your claim coverage when and if you need it. All right. Continuity of operations planning. There are two different types of plans, and a lot of the times these plans are conflated together, but they really are separate. They're very different. A business continuity plan is technically a supplement to an operating agreement for limited liability companies, or partnership agreement for partnerships, bylaws for corporations, so on and so forth, and your standard operating procedures. It's there to supplement these things that should already be set in place for your day-to-day operations. The goal of a continuity plan is to ensure the continuation of essential business functions. In other words, to ensure that functions are continued throughout or resumed rapidly after a disruption to normal operations. This does not necessarily mean disaster. It just means a general disruption, right? focuses on protecting and restoring infrastructure and systems to continue essential business operations. What are the bare bone necessities that you need to stay in place or to wind up quickly to be able to continue business operations and reduce revenue lost? And again, a business continuity plan will establish a continuity coordinator or a continuity planning team. Now, contrast that with your disaster recovery plan. This is supplemental to your business continuity plan. So this is going to be mainly to help your business determine how will it respond to an emergency through those disaster recovery continuum phases that we've talked about. So the preparedness phase, that's generally ongoing. Short-term recovery that you're looking at days, intermediate is weeks to months, long-term months to years. How does your business intend to structure itself and its recovery during each of these stages? It tends to address hazard or disaster-specific scenarios. So say, for example, your business is located in Eastern North Carolina. You're probably going to want to include how you would address hurricane or other severe storm-related events, because that's more likely to pop up for you. It can include risk assessments for known hazards or disaster trends in the business location that you have or your industry. And it establishes, similar to a business continuity plan, it establishes a disaster recovery coordinator and or a recovery planning team. Co-ops continued. We've got on the business continuity plan, we're going to dig a little bit deeper on, okay, we understand why they exist and why they're separate, but what's in them? What do they need to say? So a business continuity plan is going to identify and prioritize those essential functions of the business. It identifies valuable business assets being really anything that's going to be bringing you revenue, anything that is of value. So people, information, facilities, offices, goods, inventory, equipment, supplies, other capital like cash, investments, funding, real property, intellectual property, all of these things need to be considered. Again, and weighing the levels of risks that are associated if you lose them. For example, if a disaster event occurs, you start to lose some essential goods and inventory, and you need to make up some revenue, and you can't afford to maintain your current human capital, so your current employment structure, you have to let people go. What's the risk there if you have to let folks go? What are the cascading effects that will come from that? We want to be thinking about that ahead of time. And then following up to that, creating those contingency plans for if and when certain resources are unavailable to you. Another really important piece to the business continuity plan, and this is something that's not going to be necessarily found in your other formation documents like an operating agreement or bylaw, is a delegation of authority and establishing the orders of succession for business decision making. So what this really does is ensures that your business personnel understand who has the right to lead or make those key decisions for certain business functions when those standard operating procedures are disrupted. So contrast that with a disaster recovery plan. A DR plan is going to establish procedures and guidance for emergency situations. So emergency alerts and notifications, emergency communication channels. Who is your emergency point of contact, not only just for the business as a whole, but who is going to be your point of contact for certain business functions? Who contacts employees, vendors, shareholders, clients, customers? What is your emergency evacuation procedure? How do you handle business closures or relocation or remote work? Whether it's temporary or, in this short-term recovery, a temporary relocation versus maybe you're considering some long-term relocation needs in a long-term recovery issue. It also identifies and locates those essential disaster recovery information and documentation that you're going to need as you move forward through your relief resources. Those are going to be your formation and governing documents, insurance policies, inventory and asset catalogs, facility leases, financial statements, and other business account information. All right, so now we get into maybe some of the, okay, the disasters happened, but now what? what do we do? What's going on? Well, at this point, you've already got your business continuity and disaster recovery plans. So your first step is to follow them. You put all that effort into making them. Now we get to follow them. Now we get to put them to good use. So first step is in the immediate, follow your operating procedures and protocols that are already established for these particular scenarios. Next step, contact employees for safety check-ins and to provide status reports and assignments. If your business space is not occupiable, arrange for temporary, remote, or alternative business locations. And again, what comes along with that is the communication with vendors, clients, and customers through those pre-designated appropriate communication channels. You may want to consider advertising strategies to disseminate information about closures or changes in business hours and locations. That might be through social media, maybe certain news outlets. It's going to be specific to your business and who your target audience is, of course, but you want to be thinking about this early on and going ahead and getting that information disseminated in the ways that you need to, so folks aren't worried or confused or trying to figure out what's going on in the immediate aftermath of the disaster and unsure of where to go or where to look for it. And very importantly, obtain immediate professional assistance for your infrastructure recovery. So that's going to include, yes, your built environment, your facilities, but also any computer or technology systems that may be damaged. All right, sources of relief. I've highlighted 6 for us today. Some of them are more directly relevant than others for business recovery. I'm thinking off the top of my head here that, FEMA and DUA isn't necessarily a business recovery in the sense of the business entity itself, but it impacts individuals and it impacts to that extent, the business through what your employees can be offered or what you personally, as a small business owner or maybe a sole proprietorship, what you personally may need to be looking for in those immediate moments after disaster. So we'll get into some of this stuff, but again, some of it's a little bit more on the nose for business recovery than others, but it was worth talking about, I think. Insurance. Insurance is going to be primary recovery method number 1, right? Once the disaster event is concluded, and of course it's safe to do so, you're going to want to go out and assess the damage, assess and itemize property damage, document that damage with photo or video evidence, and maintain those damage records for future use. This will be helpful when, again, evaluating overall business losses, but also supporting any claim appraisals if you need to. Hopefully you don't need to. Hopefully everything works out smoothly between your adjuster and the inspections that happen, but sometimes they don't, and you want to prepare yourselves maybe for the worst in those situations should they come. You can make temporary repairs, and as you should, to mitigate those losses, but don't make those permanent repairs quite yet, right? You want to go through your insurance claim process fully and have your insurance provider make a determination before you engage in those permanent repairs. Contact your insurance agents to file your claims and arrange for property inspections and site visits with an adjuster. Be mindful of your claim submission deadlines and review your full policy for specific terms, including coverage details and appraisal clauses. This type of information, I'm thinking, the deadlines that you need to be thinking about, maybe a review of what's covered and what's not. That is information that would be really helpful to have a quick review over in your disaster recovery plan. If you suspect fraud or have a complaint, the North Carolina Department of Insurance is a wonderful resource for you. I've linked the website here. Hopefully you don't encounter that, but if you do, visit DOI. All right, small business. So this is what most people think of when they think small business recovery, right? The Small Business Administration, SBA, provides disaster loan assistance for losses that are otherwise not covered by insurance or FEMA. Who can apply? Yes, businesses and nonprofits, but also homeowners and renters. types of SBA loans. You've got your two main ones that folks are going to be referencing a lot. That's physical damage loans and economic injury disaster loans. Physical damage loans are for the repair or replacement of real property. We're thinking of physical, tangible damage to machinery, equipment, fixtures, inventory, leasehold improvements. Could be up to $2 million that you may be eligible for in the loan opportunity. Interest is capped at 4% if you're unable to obtain credit elsewhere. For economic injury disaster loans, when small businesses, and agricultural cooperatives, private nonprofits, this is the type of recovery opportunity for when you've suffered substantial economic loss or injury, at least. So what is substantial economic injury? Because that is something that you're going to need to be able to show. Substantial economic injury is the business is unable to meet its obligations and pay its ordinary and necessary operating employees, i.e., that's intended for working capital and business expenses like rent, utilities, fixed debt payments, things of that nature, not to fix that tangible physical property. So you want to be very clear on maybe what damage has happened, what type of property is damaged, whether it's the tangible, physical, personal, or business property, but or more of that economic working capital loss, because that's going to determine which type of loan you're going to want to apply for. There are also two other types of loans: mitigation assistance loan and military reservist economic injury disaster loan. I'll just say for those two, and really for all of these, strongly recommend you just go to the SBA website and check it out, because they have fantastic resources, not just for disaster recovery, but for other just small business needs. This being said, you're going to have to get to the website at some point if you're interested in an SBA loan, because that's the primary method of applying. Collateral requirements really depends on the type and size or amount of the loan that you'd be requesting. I would say generally for those two main types, the physical damage loans and the economic injury disaster loan, you're looking at typically for loans of $50K or less, if I'm remembering correctly, typically collateral is not required. But there are, of course, exceptions. So, but be thinking through, do you have collateral that you could use? And if not, that might cap some assistance opportunity that you'd be able to apply for. SBA, the availability of SBA loans are triggered in about 7 different ways. The main way is through a major disaster declaration, or presidentially declared major disaster declaration that authorizes the individual and household program. But there are other methods that could be used, and SBA does have some opportunity to declare its own physical disaster, economic injury disaster. So at the end of the day, just because an MDD or major disaster declaration was not declared doesn't mean that you're completely excluded from SBA. You may still have some opportunity if SBA went through one of the other 6 methods to authorize disaster loans. So check out the website. There's a disaster recovery website specifically within SBA that you can go through, learn about the different types of loans, but more specifically, actually search for your location areas and what available loans are authorized. So it's a great resource. It's easy to navigate. Definitely worth knowing about, and that way you can get there quickly. Again, if you happen to need it or need to look into it in the future. Last thing on SBA, and this is more of just a liability, something I wanted to flag for folks. You need to use the loans for the loan funding, at least for their intended purpose. There are very strict rules around this, and if you misapply or misuse the funding proceeds from the loans, you could face or be liable for about 1.5 times the proceeds dispersed to you. So be very careful on what the loan was requested for, what the funds were dispersed for, and also documenting how you are using that money. Going back to record keeping and doing internal audits, it's possible that through any of these a number of federal programs where you've received money, you may be requested to prove that you use that money for its intended purpose. So maintain your records just to protect yourself and your business. IRS, Internal Revenue Service, does offer some post-disaster tax relief. What can be offered, most of the time you're looking at extensions for filing and payment deadlines. But keep in mind, you can also have disaster loss deductions claimed. And there are some resources and support for disaster relief charitable organizations. And there's a casualties, disaster, and thefts program that offers some tax relief around casualty losses related to disasters. But most of the time, you're really looking at the first two as your primary relief options to the IRS would be likely getting an extension or an automatic extension that the IRS has authorized for certain filing and payment deadlines. And then again, keep in mind when you document your disaster losses, those are deductions that you can consider. FEMA, Federal Emergency Management Agency. So FEMA really primarily focuses on individual and household recovery. It also offers public assistance, but what you don't notice in there is private sector small business recovery. That, as we've covered, is really through the Small Business Administration. So why is FEMA here? Well, I added FEMA namely for the fact that in small business and sole proprietorship situations, you may be the only business member, right? You might be not just, you're the primary interest holder and the president and the CEO and the CFO, and you're doing it all in that situation. And so yes, you may have had business losses, but you also may have had those personal losses. So it's worth keeping FEMA, I think, in these presentations, just because it's worth a reminder that FEMA can offer individual and household relief. And it's also an opportunity for you to share recovery opportunities with your employees as well, who've suffered personal individual and household losses. FEMA does have some business-related programming, so I've added that to this slide. There's a small business program as well as a National Business Emergency Operations Center. The small business program offers assistance around federal procurement, and registered businesses can be included in the disaster response registry. For the National Business Emergency Operations Center, that really is an information and communication sharing program for private industry partners. So helpful opportunities, not so much in those immediate recovery aftermath moments for businesses, but certainly something to look at if you're interested in any of these opportunities. Similar to FEMA, disaster unemployment assistance is not something that a business can apply for. It's on an individual level. So the U.S. Department of Labor oversees the DUA program, but DUA is administered through the state or tribal governments. And it is authorized after a major disaster declaration is approved. And again, it's administered through the states. DUA provides assistance for persons who are unemployed or unable to perform services. This can include self-employment, so that is a plus. The best way to be able to take advantage of this opportunity is to monitor again, at the state level. So that's going to be the North Carolina Division of Employment Security. Those folks will announce the location areas for which DUA benefits are available and the deadlines that will exist for applying. And the best way to file a claim is to file it online. I've linked the website there. There are certain eligibility criteria that you would need to meet. As you can imagine, the condition of unemployment is one of them. You need to be able to show that you're, unemployed or unable to reach your place of employment. That's an example. There's lots of other examples of how you can become eligible for DUA. Check out the website. That's going to help narrow down what might be most applicable for you. But I think the important thing to remember, again, similar to FEMA benefits, is that DUA benefits are not necessarily for the business itself, but can indirectly benefit your business or the employees of your business. And the last slide here is a plethora of USDA programs and resources specifically for agriculture. As you can see, there are many programs available in the agricultural industry. And I included this in this way, really just, I'm not going to go through every single one, but really just to show you that for folks involved in agricultural business, which in North Carolina, we have lots of it, check out the USDA programs and resources through the United States Department of Agriculture. There may be something that is for your business that you will fall into, whether, the crop insurance might be something you're interested in, tree assistance program. I mean, there's just farm loans, farmland damage. There's lots of stuff to consider. Again, not going to go into details for all of these, but it is worth checking out and knowing about them. Okay, that was a lot. We covered a ton. Are there any questions and comments for me?
And if you have a question or a comment that you would like to ask Elizabeth, you can raise your hand. I'll be more than happy to allow you to speak, or you can easily put that question there in the chat. And it was a lot of information, Elizabeth. Very valuable information. I was so surprised. I didn't know about the business continuity plan. So thank you for going in depth about that. We do have a question. Jennifer asks, is SBA available if there is not a major disaster declaration?
SBA can become available. The most common way is, again, through that major disaster declaration that will come from the president. However, that's not the only way. There's, I think, 6 other ways the SBA can go about triggering disaster loan opportunity. So again, the best way is if you have or your business has been impacted by a disaster, even if an MDD wasn't announced, go to the SBA website and go through the forms where you can go specifically for your location areas, because SBA may have, through another pathway, opened up disaster loan opportunity.
Perfect. Thank you. I do have a question myself, Elizabeth. Can someone apply for a disaster if they are self-employed? Can they apply for disaster unemployment?
Oh, disaster unemployment. If they're self-employed, yes, absolutely. Self-employment is employment, right? And DUA doesn't, discriminate against you just because you happen to be employing yourself. So as long as you're able to meet those eligibility criteria, and again, go to those websites, check it out. There's lots of different ways that you can become eligible. But ultimately, at the end of the day, if you're self-employed, yes, you're still eligible. If you've been impacted by a disaster, and because of that disaster, you're no longer able to work.
Gotcha. And going back, again, a question for myself. With the business continuity plan, does a lawyer need to prepare that, or any other recovery plan, or is it something that that person can do themselves, or again, should a lawyer do that for them?
I think, no, you don't need a lawyer. And I'm a lawyer saying that, and other lawyers might hate me for saying that. But I think as a business owner, you're you're primarily responsible for your day-to-day operations. You know the ins and outs more than anybody else on this earth. You know your business, or you should know your business in and out, right? So I think you're the best person to go about pulling together the team that you want for a continuity plan or disaster recovery plan, and drafting it. Now, if you want it to be reviewed by a lawyer, absolutely. It's not a requirement by any means, but of course, I mean, we're here to help. We're here to help folks prepare themselves for the future. So, yeah, draft it yourselves, but of course, you can have an attorney look at it if you want, but it's certainly not a requirement.
Thank you. And do we have any other questions for Elizabeth today? All right, looks like we are all good. Well, Elizabeth, thank you so much for this presentation today and sharing all this valuable, great information. Again, I was super surprised with the business continuity plan, just knowing about that, making sure that is something that is in effect. So again, thank you so much for all this valuable information. This webinar will be available within a week on our website at ncbarfoundation.org. I would also like to thank our program partners, the SBCN, the Small Business Center Network, specifically Johnston County. We have Julie on here today. The SBC has what they do is they broadcast our webinars through their system. Oh, there's Julie right there. So thank you to the SBCN network. That is very valuable. Also to Mount Bizworks in Asheville, Prospera and Climb in Charlotte, the small business hubs at Fayetteville State in East Carolina, also the Winston-Salem Women's Business Center. If you have any additional questions, please reach out to email at foundation@ncbar.org. Also, if you would like today's presentation, Elizabeth has shared that presentation with me, and I'll be more than happy to share it with you all. But other than that, thank you all again for joining, and have an amazing day.